we get when a favorite comedian's personal tragedy is turned into material for late-night television comedy. We're delving into one of the most surprising moments in recent talk show history when Patton Oswalt stormed off Jimmy Kimmel show. After an explosive confrontation that left the crowd gasping and the entertainment world abuzz. This isn't a celebrity interview that went awry. This is a lesson in how not to treat a vegist and how one a comedian's effort at defending his late wife's memory turned into a moment that will define both their careers. Before we'll get into this incredible story, Acacia, to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you'll think about celebrities using personalities for comedy material. The tension in Studio 6A was palpable from the moment Patton Oswalt stepped on a Jimmy Kimmel Live set. What was supposed to be a routine promotional appearance for his new comedy special had already gone. It's uncomfortably estraddering the pre-in when Kimmel's producers had told him clearly they would like to address his deceased wife, Michel's death. Never mind Oswalt's publicist reminding them specifically that this object was off limits. But TV waits for no one. And as the cameras started rolling, Kimmel's opening monologue had already laid the groundwork for what would transpire as ONF, the most awkward 12 minutes in late-night television history. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the very talented Patton Oswalt. Kimmel declared with his signature smirk, although those familiar with him could sense something else in his attitude tonight. The crowd clapped warmly as Oswalt emerged, his characteristic good-natured face set aside for something more guarded, more reserved. He shook Kimmel's hand with the ease of one who had been through this ritual hundreds of times before. But as he sat down in the guest chair, the tension was palpable with an undercurrent of nervousness. Patton, great to have you back on the show. Kimmel started, his voice with that distinct cadence that talk show hosts cultivate years of experience. You look wonderful. You do? How are you doing these days? The question was harmless looking, but Oswalt's eyes flashed slightly. He'd been in the business long enough to hear a setup when none was coming. I'm doing all right, Jimmy. Thanks for having me back. It's always nice to be here. Now I have to ask. Kimmel leaned forward in his chair with the predatory urge of a comedian who smelled material, because I know our audience is curious. And I know you've been frank about it in your stand-up. How has your comedy shifted since Michelle died? I mean, grief is such a universal human experience, and you've been able to find humor. In some pretty dark corners, the audience stopped talking. Even from the back row, you could sense the energy change. Oswalt's jaw clenched almost imperceptibly, his hands clutching the armrests of his chair just a fraction of a turn more tightly than necessary. Well, Jimmy, I think that's something I'd like to pursue in my own pieces on my own terms. Tonight, I hoped we might discuss the new special. Perhaps some of the more light-hearted material I've been working on. But Kimmel was anything but persistent. Oh, come on, Patton. I know you're a fan. I've watched your latest sets, and some of your strongest stuff is from that space of suffering. There's this one thing you do about Michelle's medication. Oh, you'd found old host pill bottles when she passed away, Andy. Have to say it's funny. Dark but funny. Explain to our listener shot that was like, the camera captured Oswalt's reaction in exquisite detail. The way his face shifted from polite unease to something much darker, much more perilous. When he talked, his voice had fallen into a lower pitch. The good guy comedian act slipping off like a removed mask. Sorry, Jimmy. I don't think that's right. That material, that stuff about me, it isn't something to entertain a late-night crowd. It's part of my process of grieving, and I'd like to get past it. The audience shifted awkwardly in their seats. This wasn't the familiar back-and-forth repartee they had grown accustomed from Kimmel's program. This was real, raw, and rapidly hostile. Kimmel, though, took Oswalt's discomfort as an opportunity instead. For warning. Listen, I understand, Kimmel said, his voice assuming a patronizing quality that made a few audience members wheezy. Grief is hard, but you put this material out there, Patton. You'll make jokes at the expense of your wife's prescription pills. You discuss discovering her body. You've Medea. Tragedy, a comedy goldmine. Don't play like it's too holy to talk about, when you're actually making money off of it. The studio fell silent. Even the camera apple appeared to realize that something had gone terribly wrong. Oswalt glared at Kimmel for a full moment, his face inscrutable before slowly shaking his head. I cannot believe you just said that. Oswalt spoke softly, his voice bearing a weight that seemed to bear down on all of us in the room. You think I'm making money off of my wife's death? You wake up every morning grateful that the woman you loved, the mother of your daughter, died suddenly and unexpectedly, so you could have some fresh material. Kimmel's smirk faltered for an instant, but he doubled back. I'm just saying, if you're going to include it in your act, if you're going to make jokes about it, then it's open to discussion. That's how this works, Patton. You know that. No, Jimmy. That's not how this is done at all. Oswalt's voice was rising now, the meticulous restraint beginning to slip. There's a difference between me working through my sadness, through my work, and you, profiting from it for your TV show. There's a difference between metaciting, to expose something intimatato. It's an audience that appeared before me necessarily, and you ambushing me with it on national television after. Explicitly asked not to talk about it. The room was growing tense and bearable. Kimmel's house bands seemed uncomfortable. The audience wascient, and even the typically unflappable late-night host seemed to know he had gone too far. But rather than backing down, rather than admitting the line had crossed, Kimmel made the choice that would set the tone for the rest of this interaction. Come on, Patton, he said with a dismissive flick of his hand. Don't be so sensitive. We're all comedians here. We all mine our personal lives for material. The difference is some of us are honest about it. The accusation lingered like a poisonous cloud. Oswalt rose to his feet slowly, his movements measured and controlled. The way one moves when they're straining very hard not to blow. When he spoke, his tone was an icy whisper. Honest about it. Jimmy, let me show you what honest looks like. Honest is waking up each morning and still reaching for the other side of the bed, although it has been empty for years. Honest is telling your 7-year-old daughter why mommy is not coming home. Honest is having the courage to go on stage and discuss the worst thing that has ever happened to you, because that is how you process it. And perhaps, just perhaps, it helps someone else who is going through the same experience. He broke the silence, his chest expanding and contracting with controlled breaths, before going on with a precision that sliced through the studio like a knife. Honest is not exploiting the other person's tragedy as a good punchline for your monologue. Honest is not ambushing a guest on their most dramatic memories because you believe itis, good television. So don't you dare challenge my honesty, Jimmy. Note about this? The audience was glued. Several individuals in the front row were seen to be uncomfortable, wriggling in their seats and avoiding looking at the stage. Kimmel's band members were gazing at their instruments, and the camera operators looked uncertain if the eye should continue filming or avert their gaze. But Kimmel, in a moment that would be analyzed later by media critics and comedy scholars alike, opted to raise the stakes instead of lowering them. You know what, Patton? Kimmel declared, his tone assuming a harsher tone, the facade-off buddy host finally abandonagentary. I think you're a bit hypocritical here. You want to have it both ways. You want to be a blatto, stand up on stage and say things about your dead wife, receive the sympathy, receive the laughs, receive the standing ovations. But then, when another person mentions it, suddenly, it's off limits. That's not the way comedy works, and you know it. The words strike Oswalt like a physical blow. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, hurt, and then something much more threatening. When he spoke, his voice little more than a whisper. But in the absolute silence off studio, each word ringing with perfect clarity. Did you just refer to Michelle, my dead wife? Is that what you just uttered, Tome, on national television? For the first time since the interview started, Kimmel appeared to realize he may have crossed the line. A flash of doubt crossed his face, but it was too late. The words were out there, recorded on film, seen by hundreds of viewers in the studio and millions more who would eventually view the footage. I didn't mean it like that, Kimmel responded hastily, but his tone was unconvincing. I just mean that you mention her death in your routine, so it's not out of the quest. Not to bring it up here. No, Oswalt replied, shaking his head slowly. No, you don't get to backpedal on that one. You Sage is my dead wife. Like that's her. Deafening typical. Like that was all she was. Not Michelle McNamara, the talent ether. Not Michelle McNamara, the caring mother. Not Michelle McNamara, the woman who dedicated years of her life pursuing serial killers and advocating for justice for victims that everyone else had forgotten. Just my deceased wife. The studio seemed to be holding its breath, even the normally busy backstage area had fallen silent, with producers and crew members huddling around screens to see the confrontation unfold. This was no longer a talk show interview. This was something much more personal, much more. Michelle was a person. Jimmy Shu was a human being with dreams and goal sand, fears and hopes. She was someone who made the world a better place, just by being in it. And when I talk about her in my act, when I share those stories, I'm not doing it for laughs or sympathy or ovations. I'm doing it because I won't let her be forgotten. I'm doing it because her story should be told, even the painful bits, especially the painful bits. Kimmel was obviously struggling. He's torn between his urge to push back and his increasing realization that he was losing this fight badly. The audience was strongly on Oswalt's side. You could sense it in the way they were leaning forward. Hanging on every word, when Kimmel finally got a word in, voice had lost a lot of its initial confidence. Look, Patton, I think we're both getting a little overheated here. Maybe Westwold stepped back and recalled that we're both comedians. We both know that comedy is based on pain, and sometimes we must discuss hard stuff in order to come to the truth of them. But Oswalt wasn't letting him. Don't you even think about turning this into comedy philosophy. Jimmy, this isn't about the universality of comedy or of connection between pain and lowing. This is about you choosing to make my sorrow a target for your amusement, even after being very specifically told not to go there. This is about you stripping my wife down to a joke and then playing victim because I'm somehow being unreasonable for calling you on it. The comedian's tone was rising now, the controlled restraint finally starting to break. You want to know what's really funny, Jimmy? What is truly funny? The fact that you believe you're defending team at this moment? You believe you're taking some sort of principled stance regarding the nature of artistic work, but you're not. You're simply being cruel. You're being cruel to a person who is a guest on your show. You're being cruel to the memory of a person who cannot defend herself. Kimmel's face was flushed at this point, his well-maintained television persona thrown completely out the window. I'm not being cruel, Patton. I'm being honest. And if you can't take a little honest question and gawk your own work, then perhaps you'll not be releasing that work in the first place. The charge hung in the air like a dare. Oswalt glared at Kimmel for a good long time, his face impassive. When he finally spoke, his voice was once more cynical, but beneath it lay something that caused all the people in the room to sit forward. You know what, Jimmy, you're right about anything. I do release that stuff out there. I do mention Michelle's death in my act. I discuss the evening I discovered her, discuss the months following as I could hardly cope. I discuss attempting to explain to my daughter why mommy wouldn't be coming home. I discuss all of it because that is what I do to process trauma. That is how I live. He got up from his chair, his movements slow and controlled. But there's the contrast between what I don't and what you're doing. When I speak of Michelle, I speak with love. I speak with respect. I speak because I want people to understand who she was, not how she died. When you speak of her, you speak because you believe it's good television. Speak because you believe their people's suffering is something Tobe watched. The audience was absolute liquid now. Abinthy, normally agitated late-night audience, had ceased to fidget, ceased to cough, ceased to rustle in their seats. The only noise in the studio was the silent thumb of the cameras and the almost inaudible sound of the air conditioning. I've been doing it for 20 years, Jimmy. I've appeared on every talk show, every podcast, every comedy club in this nation. I've spoken about my private life, my troubles, my failures, meashams. I've joked about my divorce, my weight, my neurosis, my family. I've shared it all because that's what comedians do. We dig through our lives for material and we present it to the world. He stopped, his eyes never leaving Kimmel's face. But there is a line, Jimmy. There's always a line, and that line is respect. When I speak of Michelle, I do so because I love her, Andy, miss her, and I want the world to know how amazing she was. When you speak about her, you do so because you believe it. Will garner you ratings. Kimmel's mouth opened and closed a few times, but no speech emerged. For maybe the first time in his life as a talk show host, he appeared to be actually speechless. The silence lingered, growing more awkward by the second, until Oswalt finally shook his head and stepped toward the edge of the stage. You know what the worst part of all this is, Jimmy? Oswalt asked, his voice loaded with a weight that seemed to fall over the entire studio like a weighty blanket. Michelle would have all stood up for you. If someone had hurt you the way you've hurt her memory tonight, she would have been the first person to get up and say that wasn't right. It's the kind of human Blanche was. She believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, even when they didn't deserve it. The words hit Kimmel like a physical blow. His face went pale. And for a moment, just a moment, something that might have been shame flickered across his features, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the defensive posture of Samayan, who knew they were wrong, but couldn't bring themselves to admit it. Patton. I think you're overreacting, Kimmel said, but his voice lacked conviction. This is simply a conversation we end to comedians regarding the nature of our profession. You're turning this into something that it is not. Oswalt had laughed, but it had been no joke. A conversation. Jimmy, you've spent the past 10 minutes attempting to Make me be thankful for my wife's passing Becca's. It provided me with material. You've turned her into a punchline and then proceeded like I'm the one being unreasonable for protesting. This is not a conversation. This is Yao being a bully. The accusation hung in the air like a cloud of poison. Kimmel's face went bright red, his carefully cultivated calm finally breaking calmly. I'm not a bully, Patton. I'm a comedian just like you. And Semetamescum knee hurts. Sometimes we have to discuss unpleasant things, Toriv at the truth. The truth. Oswalt's voice climbing, the careful restraint, finally beginning to fray. You want to know the truth, Jimmy? The truth is that I wake up every morning and for just a split second I forget that she's not there. I reach for her side of the bed or I start to call her name. Or I hear Alice laughing in the other room, and I think I can't what to tell Michelle about this, Anthony. The studio was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Even the camera operators appear to be holding their breath in fear of making any noise with it, would shatter the magic of this Rahanis moment. That's the truth, Jimmy. The truth is that every day is a battle. Every day I have to decidetto keep going, to keep living, to keep being a father to my daughter. Even though the person I love most want to share all of this with is gone, and when I take the stage and speak off that fight, when I share thoughts instances with a crowd, I'm not doing it for laughs or sympathy or yorings. I'm doing it because maybe, just maybe, there's someone else out there going through the same thing, and they need to know that they're not alone. Kimmel opened his mouth to reply, but Oswalt wasn't finished. But you've made it into entertainment. Jimmy, you've taken the worst thing that ever happened to me, and you've attempted to turn it into a bit for your monologue. You've taken my sorrow, and you've weaponized it against me. And the worst part is, you do believe you're entitled to do it. The comedian took another step towards the edge of the SHS stage, his body language indicating that this interview was finished, whether Kimmel wanted it to be or not. I've spent 20 years in this business, Jimmy. I've handled hecklers, I've handled bad reviews, I've handled bombing on stage. I've handled critics who couldn't get my sense of humor, but I've never had anybody attempt to use my wife's death as a tool against me. Kimmel was a bias-lightering his hair out now, torn between his compulsion to strike back and his burgeoning realization that he had lost this fight entirely. The crowd was squarely in Oswalt's camp. You could sense it in the way they were seated, in the way they were, staring at him with a dash of sympathy and revulsion. Patton, please, Kimmel implored, his tone a whiny one that was utterly inconsistent with his normal assertive persona. I think we've Beth said things we don't mean. I didn't. We break, perhaps begin anew, discuss your new special? But Oswalt was already taking off his microphone, his motions slow and decisive. No, Jimmy, we're not beginning again. We're finished. This interview is finished. Quite honestly, so is my regard for you as a human being and as a comedian. He placed the microphone on the chair that he had been sitting in. The tiny thud it produced somehow meaning more than all the words that had been said. You know what the actual tragedy is here, Jimmy? It's not that you jumped me with questions regarding Michelle. It's not even Thatcher referred to her as my dead wife on national TV. The true tragedy is Thatcher did have an opportunity to do something meaningful tonight. You did have an opportunity to engage in a genuine discussion regarding grief, loss, and how we work through trauma, through art. Instead, you used it to make money. The studio was utterly quiet now. Even the typically busy backstage area had phalanquiate with producers and crewmates, standing in a frozen tableau, not knowing what to do or say. This was new ground for a late-night show, and everyone knew they were seeing something that will be the subject of discussion for years to come. I'm going to leave now, Jimmy Oswalt said, his tone steady, but holding a text of steel. I'm going home to me daughter, and I'm going Tatri to explain to her why Daddy was upset on television tonight, and y'all know what I'm going to tell her. I'm going to tell her that sometimes people say hurtful things, and sometimes they didn't realize how much damage they're doing, and sometimes the best thing you can do is walk away. He turned toward the exit, then paused and looked back at Kimmel. One last time. I hope you're proud of yourself, Jimmy. I hope this was worth it. I hope the ratings are good because they cost your integrity and my respect. With that, Patton Oswalt strode off the Jimmy Kimmel live stage, leaving a stunned audience, a speechless host Andone of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night TV history. The cameras rolled for a few more seconds, recording Kimmel's stunned look and the total silence off studio before cutting to commercial. The confrontation took less than 15 minutes, but it would be spoken of for years to come. was a masterclass in respecting people's boundaries, even in the entertainment world, said and done. And a reminder that there is a real person behind every comedian's joke, with real feelings and real hurt. So what do you think? Is Jimmy Kimmel in the wrong for pushing those boundaries? Or is Patton Oswalt being overly sensitive regarding his own stuff? Let me know in comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories from the world of entertainment.